Welcome to Hope is Here. My name is Greg Horn, and one of the topics that's been really heavy on my heart over the past year is the topic of grief. And, we don't like to talk about that, especially as men. Put your big boy pants on, suck it up, let's go on. And there's definitely times in our life that we have to do that. But at the same time, I think that unfortunately we just don't allow in our culture, our fast-paced society, to be able to have time to grieve and to process losses in life, and not just necessarily the death of a loved one, but other areas in our life that we have losses in. And I'm excited this week. Our guest for our first few programs this week is going to be Amanda Speaks, and she is a counselor, and she actually has a practice that specializes in grief. So, Amanda, first, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, unfortunately, you're no stranger to loss. We all are, but you had a real just difficult loss in your life, losing your brother, Barron. Tell us a little bit about Barron and his life, and how you can definitely relate to people over grief and loss.
Okay. Well, Barron, he is my younger brother, and I say is because I know he's in heaven with Jesus, so that gives me so much peace and comfort. But Barron struggled with addiction for 7 years. He was diagnosed with arthritis at the age of 21 and placed on pain medication, and his addiction spiraled out of control from then. And Barron had the biggest heart for God. Even in the midst of his addiction, he loved God. He wanted to share God with people, but he was in Florida at a recovery center attempting to get sober, and he got kicked out because he relapsed, and we were notified that he was found passed away in his truck from an overdose. And so with that happening, the grief that I experienced, it didn't just happen then. I grieved over him when he first became addicted because I lost that brother. I didn't know who he was anymore. The drugs make that person completely different than who they used to be. So the grief was not only limited to when I found out he passed, but when I first learned that he was on drugs and losing that brother figure I had in my life. But with the grief that I experienced when he passed, I didn't handle it very well at first. I turned to some substances that I probably shouldn't have, and that lasted about a month. And I realized I can't do this anymore. This is not what God wants for me. He wants me to use Barron's story to help others and to encourage others and to really help them through the times that they're dealing with. And so I put my big girl panties on, and I decided I have to get through this. This is something. And so, exploring the different stages of grief and really reaching that for myself. The 5 stages of grief with death and dying. They're denial, bargaining, depression, anger, and acceptance. And what people don't understand is that you can relive those many times throughout your life, and they don't happen in any particular order. And so, dealing with the death, it's tough because people handle things differently. It's unique to everyone.
Well, it really is. I've found that, and I've not been able to experience quite the pain that you had to losing a brother. I've got 2 brothers and a sister that are some of my best friends, so I can't even imagine what you've gone through losing Barron. And yet I found myself, I was watching a movie, and it really wasn't like a sappy movie. It's called The Intern. I believe it was Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway, and Robert De Niro's kind of mentoring Anne Hathaway in this movie. And there was a point where she said, 2/3 through the movie, that she was, when I'm around you, you just have a calming effect on me. And Robert De Niro, he was wearing these glasses, had a coat and tie on, and he just looked like my dad. Mm-hmm. And my dad passed away about 3.5 years ago, and I don't know, it just was like an out-of-body experience, but I started thinking, that's the kind of effect my dad had on people and myself. Mm-hmm. Even though I'm a 54-year-old grown man, I just found myself, my eyes start watering and feeling that pain and that grief and that missing him. So when you say that it's not just a one-time event. It can happen at any time. I'm glad to hear you're telling me that I was okay. I was normal to have those feelings this past weekend. That was okay?
Yes, exactly. And there'll be plenty of times throughout your life where you'll see things or you'll experience moments and it makes you think of that person and you relive that grief all over again if it's undealt with. But there is hope. You can learn to get through the grief and not have that struggle anymore, because grief is normal and natural. It's not something pathological. It's often mislabeled as depression, anxiety, any type of other things that people get on medication for. And when I'm talking about grief, I'm not only talking about the death and dying. I'm talking about loss of a job, loss of a marriage, loss of your faith even, struggling with your faith and God, why is this happening? Why are these things happening? Also, too, it may be positive losses. And what I mean is, getting married, losing that part of yourself that you've been single for so long, that's a loss and a readjustment. Anything that is a big change in our life can be considered grief.
That's great information there. I hadn't thought about it from that aspect, and that's why I wanted to have you on today, because I just feel like our culture, everything is, I call it a microwave society, instant credit, drive-through,
Exactly.
Amazon, you can order it and have it the next day.
Oh, gosh, yes. Well, I do love Amazon. I will take advantage of that.
I agree, and some of that's good, but, I think that if we're really going to grieve, help me with this, but it takes time sometimes, doesn't it?
Exactly, it does. And it takes work. It takes you putting in the effort to want to change. My dad used to say, some people aren't happy unless they're unhappy. Some people cling to that because they don't, it's scary to get better. It is scary to want to go out there and live life normally again. So we hold on to that. And we actually make things worse for ourselves by doing that. It does take time, but there's hope. And you can get through things. Whenever you may say, well, how do I know if I have unresolved grief? Well, being able to not talk about it without feeling upset or sad, it triggering those intense, terrible emotions that you felt when it was going through it. It's not saying, oh, someone died, let's be happy. No, it's saying, hey, I remember their life. I remember the good times. And I'm able to talk about those and share. Like with Barron, it was really hard for me at first, for the first month, I said, but now I rejoice because I know he's with Jesus and I'm able to use his testimony and his story to help others. And I've seen God work in some great ways in my practice and in just my counseling career since that happened 2 years ago.
Well, that's the thing. I think Romans 8:28 says all things work together for those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. And your grandfather, Wayne Smith, who's bearing his name after,
yes.
I remember him singing that verse many times on Sunday mornings. And I never realized that until I went through a flood and a bankruptcy and a divorce myself, and you get those kinds of loss and you realize, okay, is that true? And I'm here, and that's why I started Hope Is Here about a year and a half ago, that was in 2001, that all that is true, that God will allow him
exactly
to do that.
Exactly. Yes, we have to allow it. And, sometimes God sees things like a parade. Okay, we're in a parade and we're standing at a fence and there's a little peephole and we see each little one go by one. Well, God's on top of the building looking down, seeing it from start to finish. And, if we just trust that he has a plan for our lives, because he will take bad and make good out of it if we choose to allow him to.
Well, let's talk about we're going to talk about the 5 stages tomorrow, but let's talk a little bit about what are some unhealthy ways that people choose to grieve sometimes in your experience with clients and so forth.
Any type of addiction that can develop, alcohol, gambling, overeating, shopping, jumping from one thing to the next. And what I mean by that is, say you got divorced or you lost a pet. Going out and jumping into a new relationship, or going out and saying, well, I'm going to go get another pet. we intend to kind of cover up these emotions because we don't want to deal with them. Like you mentioned when we first started, sometimes men, especially, nothing against men, they're just built different for a reason. They tend to want to try to fix things themselves and just push things away. And so people don't seek help. They don't ask, hey, I need help. I'm struggling with this. People will be like, oh, well, you'll feel better. You'll get through this. But they don't want to take the time to ask, hey, what's going on with you? How can I help with this situation?
Well, and that's the thing, too. I think that, and we may expand on this in another program, but I think another thing that I at least found in myself, besides being a man, but also being a man of faith, that sometimes we think, well, if I've got strong faith, I shouldn't be sad or I shouldn't have to grieve this long. And that's kind of a lie, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it says we're not to forsake the assembling together. We're built for relationships with others, and that's because we can't get through this alone. We have God to help us, but also He's provided us with these tools and these people to help us through it. So utilizing those, even when we're scared to, I know mental health is a big cliche thing a lot of times. People are embarrassed about it, or people think they're weak if they need to ask for help, but that's not true at all. I think it takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength and character to reach out and say, hey, I can't do this on my own. I need help. And that's what I'm here for, and some other therapists and pastors and all that stuff, because God has designed us for this role. This is the role that He's placed in our lives, and it's to be able to help people.
Well, and I love what you're saying there about, it's okay to ask for help, because I do believe that sometimes men and women of faith, especially people that are older in age like myself, in their 50s, 60s, 70s, they're like, well, I should be able to deal with this. And yet I know I've had to encourage some friends and people my age and older, just, please go see a counselor or a therapist. And a lot of them have kicked and screamed, but then once they've went, they're like, thank you for letting me go, because as you said, God, just like there's medical doctors, there's also doctors to help us with our mental and emotional health.
Exactly. And, you said a key word there, should. And I say you could should yourself to death. Coulda, woulda, shoulda. There's many things I should have done, but I didn't, or I should do, but I don't. And we have to look at this as what it is, not the what ifs or the shoulds. This is what I'm going through right now. What can I do to get help with it?
Absolutely. Well, that's why we're doing this program here. We're talking with Amanda Speaks, and she is a therapist here in Lexington, specializing in grief. And I know a lot of people think, well, I don't know. What would be if somebody, what are the type of people that you come to see, your clients, share with what people, if they want to see a grief counselor? Well,
a lot of people associate grief with death and dying, like I said before, but it can be so many other things. I have people that I saw a woman who recently switched jobs within a school system. And she said, I'm getting angry. I'm feeling depressed. And I said, you're grieving over that. She goes, oh, I didn't realize. People don't understand that any type of loss or change. So another word that I like to use for grief is stress. And people are like, well, how can you say those two things interchangeably? Well, look at it that way. It's a stressor in your life. It's something that's bothering you that wasn't there before. It's causing these different reactions in you. So my clients can range from people, moving, a new job, somebody being anxious about speaking in public, anything like that I can help with, but definitely grief and dying.
Well, we're out of time, unfortunately, but the good news is Amanda's going to be with us for another program or two, so we hope that you will tune in tomorrow. If you want to touch base with her, something she said or I've said resonates with you, you can find out more about her at griefrecoverycare.com. That's griefrecoverycare.com, or you can call her at 859-595-0836. I'm Greg Horn, and this is Hope is Here.
To go to the next level, you have to change the way that you think. There is way more inside of you than you can imagine.
Everyone has influence. Come to the Global Leadership Summit on August 9th and 10th and learn skills to help you lead transformation. The summit features high-impact leaders like Craig Groeschel, Angela Ahrens, T.D. Jakes, and more. Experience the Global Leadership Summit on August 9th and 10th. Register today at willowcreek.com/summit or call 800-570-9812 and use the priority code radio.
Local host site in Central Kentucky is Lex City Church. Check them out online at lexcity.church.